Tens of millions of people around the world have little or no access to pain relief, not even sufferers of cancer and other terminal diseases. But the problem isn't a lack of drugs or even money. Morphine, the most effective pain reliever, costs just pennies to produce. Why are so many people being left in agony? Isn't freedom from pain a basic human right?
We have enough morphine supplies, but we can't administer them because of these wretched rules.
Here, in the rural outskirts of Calcutta, India, top-notch medical care is hard to come by. But Dr. Abhijit Dam makes do. The day we met him, he had transformed this school courtyard into a makeshift clinic and virtual pharmacy, dispensing drugs for a variety of ailments. But when he heard reports of a woman dying of breast cancer in a neighboring village, Dr. Dam knew he was in for a challenge. The woman, named Fatima, had a massive breast tumor, clearly infected and clearly painful.
She has severe pain. She can't sleep at night.
Fatima's family says she screams in agony day and night. But because of strict narcotics laws, morphine, the gold standard in pain treatment, is nearly impossible to get in most of India. So Dr. Dam is forced to improvise with readily available analgesics.
This is really difficult to watch, and it's particularly difficult considering that, with a 2 rupee medication, she would not be screaming. There's absolutely no need for her to be in that kind of agony.
Diederik Lohman of Human Rights Watch says freedom from medical pain should be a basic human right, especially since it's entirely possible to achieve with morphine, a cheap, easily made, and medically safe drug.
The testimony you get from patients who have advanced cancer but no access to pain treatment is very similar to the testimony you'll get from someone who's been tortured by police, right? They will say, the pain was just unbearable. I could not stand it. I would do anything to end the pain. For a victim of police torture, they will usually sign a confession and the torture stops. For someone who has cancer pain, that torturous experience continues for weeks and sometimes months on end.
Much of the problem comes down to the fact that medical morphine is virtually identical to its illicit cousin, heroin, one of the major targets of the global war on drugs.
The war on drugs that we've been fighting for the last few decades, what has been happening is the focus has been entirely on preventing the misuse of controlled substances, with almost everybody forgetting about the fact that these same controlled substances are also essential medicines.
So what do? We bring in very stringent narcotic regulations, which effectively stops medical use of morphine.
Dr. M.R. Rajagopal, a leader of Indian palliative care, says narcotics laws in India are so strict that doctors simply avoid prescribing it.
And especially in this country, we still fear opioids. Now, when we are afraid, we are no longer rational.
And the few doctors who do use morphine in their practice are under such strict control that they could actually face jail time if any drugs go missing. India's Central Bureau of Narcotics enforces the country's morphine rules. Rules which former Narcotics Commissioner Romesh Bhattacharya now acknowledges are unduly stringent.
The laws that are so harsh that doctors are scared to prescribe them. A doctor has to account for even a 0.1 milligram of morphine. 0.1 milligram goes astray, they can even go to jail for a year.
It's all the more troubling, Bhattacharya says, because India happens to be the world's largest supplier of medical-grade opium, which is made from thousands of hectares of government-run poppy fields and shipped overseas.
It's rather strange, it's rather paradoxical that, here we have enough morphine supplies, but we can't administer them because of these wretched rules. And that is what has to change.
To make matters worse, says Dr. Dam, since morphine sells for just pennies a pill, there's little incentive for pharmacists to stock it.
The profit margin in narcotics is very limited, as far as morphine tablets are concerned especially. So naturally, a person who would be selling morphine would not be interested in stocking morphine because the profit margin is less and the paperwork necessary for stocking that morphine is like crazy.
And since there's so little demand for local morphine, India's lucrative pharmaceutical industry largely doesn't bother manufacturing morphine pills.
Because of the strict controls, nobody wants to take up the challenge of manufacturing morphine tablets.
Yusuf Hamid runs Cipla, one of the largest drug makers in India.
Making tablets is the easiest thing possible. But when I make the tablets, the paperwork required for me to give those tablets to various institutions is absolutely massive.
In the US, Canada, and much of Europe, simpler drug laws and the marketing power of pharmaceutical companies make access to expensive brand-name prescription painkillers much easier. But even some wealthier countries suffer from lack of access to opiates. As this map shows, people in more than half the countries around the globe have limited access to medical morphine, and of that number, more than half face severe shortages of pain medication. Here in Ukraine, some of the same bureaucratic hurdles that plague India mean that even a former decorated KGB colonel is left to die in pain. Artur Shumanov has stage 4 prostate cancer and is living out the end of his life alone and suffering.
Я кричу ночью здесь.
It got so bad, he says, he's left his family in Kiev and moved to this cottage in a remote village hours from the capital.
Я не хочу, чтобы они видели, как я плачу. От боли.
The undertreatment of pain is a huge, huge issue. In Ukraine, pain is part of life.
Mm-hmm. We can see the mark what the radiotherapy was given.
We invited Dr. James Cleary, a leading authority on global palliative care, to join us of the scope of the problem here.
Because of his pain, he's cut himself off from his family. What greater time is there for a man to need his family than when he's facing advanced disease? But what did he say? He didn't want them to see him cry.
Artur has found his own way to numb his agony.
И так каждый день бутылка.
And if it gets bad enough, Artur showed us his other plan to stop the pain.
Я чтобы застрелиться, когда будет сильно больно.
To watch Arturo reach under his pillow as he's talking about potentially ending his own life and then just pulling out this gun. This is not a gun in a cupboard. This is a gun that he sleeps on. So clearly the impact of this severe pain is great if he's that close most of the time.
Critics of Ukraine's system say it's a throwback to the old Soviet days of red tape with cumbersome paperwork and arbitrary limits on doses.
What you see in Ukraine is that 4 doctors have to sign off on every prescription of morphine. In Ukraine, 50 milligrams is the maximum per day. In the US, there are people who will get thousands of milligrams every 4 hours. So it's a night and day difference.
Drug availability is so strict in Ukraine that the little morphine that is available is hand-delivered to patients at home by nurses.
Можем, без этого.
And there are no pill forms of the drug, only antiquated so-called IM, or intramuscular doses that must be injected with a needle. We were there when the nurse arrived at Artur's house with a small dose of injectable painkiller.
Really? That's how you're doing care?
The injection gave Artur a little relief, but he said the pain soon returned.
I haven't ordered an IM injection for a patient in 20 years. The medicine only lasts for approximately 2 hours. So patients are spending a lot of time in pain. An ambulance comes to your home. You say, what am I going to do if it doesn't come? You want me just to suffer in this situation.
There is one place in Ukraine where patients in pain can have ready access to painkillers: in the hospital. At the Cherkasy Oncology Hospital in Kiev.
Dr. Cleary, pleased to meet you.
Cancer patients like these were clearly comfortable, certainly a contrast to what we saw in the countryside. That's because in hospital, physicians like Dr. Irena Schlaga don't have to abide by the strict dose limits, and hospital staff are readily available to administer the drugs to patients in pain.
He's looking very comfortable at the moment.
Он поступил к нам в очень плохом состоянии. 5, да, коли получил? 7 часа.
But the policy in Ukraine is that patients who have completed their treatment or who are deemed terminal are sent home. And physicians like Dr. Schlaga know they're sentencing them to suffering.
Will he go home on morphine?
He cannot get morphine.
That must be tough for you when you send people home.
Thanks for understanding. Yes, it's hard.
Yeah.
And once they go home, it's not just the patients who suffer. It's also their family members. Two months before we met her, Nadia Zhukovskaya's 27-year-old son Vlad passed away from cancer.
Влад и другие, они же ушли на тот свет замордованными. Они ушли, не просто ушли, они замученные.
Vlad was sent home with terminal brain cancer in 2007 and spent the last 3 years of his life in near constant pain because all he could access was the minuscule government dose.
У него сильные головные боли. Оно не обезболивалось. И 5 этих ампул они ничего не давали. У него эта головочка разрывалась.
What haunts Nadia the most, perhaps, is that her son's pain at one point got so bad, he tried to throw himself out of a hospital window.
Он говорил, что я, один раз разольюсь и уже не буду чувствовать этой боли.
Vlad survived the suicide attempt, but he suffered for 2 more years until he died at home.
А тех, кого выписывают домой умирать, это вообще очень страшно. Это действительно брошенные люди, которые умирают на глазах у своей семьи. Это страшно, они никому не нужны.
Sergei Pysurnik has become a one-man crusader to help suffering patients in his country. At first, he just stockpiled medical equipment in his tiny apartment. But he's gone on to become a modern-day Robin Hood, risking arrest by taking small doses of painkillers from patients who don't need it.
So this contains 7 milligrams, 8 milligrams of morphine in it.
And delivering it to those who do, all for free.
So is this legal, what you're doing?
Нет, за это, если нас остановят, посадят в тюрьму.
No, if we are stopped, we will be taken to prison.
The punishment in Ukraine for illegal narcotics distribution is 3 to 5 years in prison. Artur is one of Pysurnik's stops. Every few weeks, he brings the old man a supply of painkillers to supplement the small government-approved dose he gets from the nurse. Minutes after the injection, Artur sprung to life.
Я могу походить, сходить покормить гусей, курилей, всех животных своих, собак покормить. А когда болит, мне ничего не хочется, я лежу здесь и все.
Artur died shortly after our visit, but it was clear that the work Pysurnik was doing at least made his last few months bearable.
Он меня выручил. Болит, конечно, но живу. Уже 1,5 года живу. Уже ему. Спасибо, Сережа.
Why does it take a young man skirting the law to bring relief to patients like Artur? We put that to Yuri Gubsky, a palliative care specialist with the Ukrainian Ministry of Health.
Нет в списке зарегистрированных препаратов в Украине, огромном списке многотысячном, нет морфина сульфата сегодня.
So we asked him why oral morphine, the standard form of the drug for palliative care, isn't in the official registry of Ukrainian medicines and treatments.
Я все время отвечаю на этот вопрос, хотя я на него не должен отвечать, это не мой вопрос. Я получаю ответ, что в действительности фармацевтические фирмы не представляют заявок на регистрацию таких препаратов.
And he says pharmaceutical companies don't request it because there's no demand by doctors.
Everybody expresses their understanding of their problem, and we think that we shall settle the point during the nearest months.
But as of today, 6 months after we spoke with him, nothing has changed.
To me, the biggest obstacle here is really inertia. When there are basic and inexpensive steps that you can take that will have an immediate effect on the lives of tens of thousands of people, you have no excuse for not taking them.
Dr. Rajagopal in India started taking those very steps in his small state, Kerala. Here, we saw patients like Susie, who has a form of cancer called multiple myeloma, readily accessing morphine pills.
She is on 10 milligrams of morphine every 4 hours. She is pain-free most of the time, and that now she is able to sleep.
And Dr. Rajagopal can even write the family a prescription for morphine, so they can control her pain on their own.
The vast majority of patients, the first time we see them, that can be horrendous. But usually by the time we are ready to make the second or third visit, very often they have changed, they are smiling now. They are also eternally thankful for what little we are able to do for them. He says earlier he was unable to walk, he was bedbound and he could walk only with 2 people supporting him. But now he is able to walk a bit. The hollows that you see.
Dr. Rajagopal is able to help these patients because for years he'd been working on convincing the state government in Kerala to simply loosen its narcotics rules.
In Kerala, things got changed because there was a strong palliative care movement in the state. We together built a system of getting the low-cost morphine powder from the government factory, making low-cost morphine and having it available. And the bureaucracy, particularly the drug controller of Kerala and his office, responded positively to that.
And Dr. Rajagopal struck a deal with the Indian pharmaceutical maker Cipla to make cheap morphine for his clinics.
The little that Cipla is doing is purely humanitarian. It is not a business. So I would strongly suggest that the government of India takes this up more as a challenge and distribute morphine tablets.
Now morphine is even made in bulk, right at the regional cancer hospital in Kerala. So patients with potentially excruciating tumors can lay quiet. Children with cancer can at least enjoy their afternoons in comfort. But the improvements in India are only in the tiny state of Kerala. There are still 27 other states in India where access to morphine is limited at best or simply non-existent. But there is one country in the developing world that stands out for its innovations in pain management. Of all places, Uganda. This small, poor, war-torn country has scarce medical resources, which is why doctors have been arguing that the least they should be able to offer patients is comfort.
For Uganda, 80% of patients with cancer have already got advanced cancers. And for those, there isn't much you can do except to give them palliative care.
Dr. Jack Jagwe, who was with the Ugandan Health Ministry in the early 1990s, worked closely with foreign doctors and the international community to put into writing that every citizen of Uganda should have the right to palliative care, a first in Africa.
The majority of our people here don't want to die in hospital when they have a life-threatening illness. They want to die in their villages with their relatives around. So if you are going to offer palliative care, you have to have a means of taking your palliative care expertise to them in the villages.
But the medical community still had a challenge: how to reach the majority of patients in the country, most of whom are hundreds of kilometers from the few doctors in the capital, Kampala.
What happened in Uganda was that there were kind of the right people with the right ideas at the right time. They took a very systematic approach. What are the barriers? And so they started talking about, we don't have enough physicians to provide palliative care to everyone in the country. How do we solve this?
So in 2004, the Ugandan government changed its rules, amending a law to allow nurses and clinical officers to prescribe morphine, another first in Africa. Today, nurses can go see patients in pain, and without any doctor's involvement, they can legally administer liquid morphine.
Demonstrate how they're supposed to measure their drug. They're supposed to pour on the lid a little bit, then get the syringe and draw.
A simple solution to what seemed until recently an intractable problem.
What happened in Uganda is replicable. It could happen in many other African countries, and models that we've seen in India, in Kerala, for example, could be replicated in countries around the world.
But while local efforts have made changes in small pockets of the world, nothing will change globally until the international community acknowledges that patients in pain are getting caught in the crossfire of the war on drugs. The United Nations Office of Drugs and Crimes, or UNODC, leads the global effort to curtail narcotics trafficking.
The report we launched today paints a sobering picture of the threat posed by illegal drugs. Traffickers break more than the law. They fuel terrorism and insurgency.
This blunt axe that is just, looking at preventing misuse. And what you see is that, now we have collateral damage from that war on drugs, which is millions of patients in pain who can't get access to the medications that they need.
We put that very point to the executive director of the UNODC at their annual meeting in late June.
It seems like one of the side effects of the efforts to curtail illicit narcotics actually also curtail legal medical narcotics.
Unfortunately, you're right. In some parts, especially in developing countries, there is not enough access to this kind of licit medicines. We're looking in favor to encourage government to allow patients to get legitimate access to these substances, of course, under strict medical control.
This may be a good first step, since until recently, the UN hasn't publicly acknowledged the problem.
See, you can see the twitching.
But patients will continue to suffer until these global bodies actively work with countries to exclude medical morphine from the war on drugs. And that simply hasn't happened.
Don't you think that people deserve palliative care? Don't you think that people have a right to die with dignity? I do believe so. It's just because I believe so, I do what I do.
We need to be such a nuisance that officials say, well, it's easier to do what they're asking us to do than to have to keep up with, with them knocking on our doors.
The saddest part is there has been no systematic evaluation of the problem. In some pockets, like in Kerala or in Uganda, some enterprising pioneers bring in a system that is locally suited, but they are in pockets. I'm just praying for the day when there will be an evaluation of the burden of suffering in the developing world and an action plan aimed at overcoming it.